Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webcast, Session 3C, Meeting High Energy Efficiency Goals. I'm John Karchek with Avangrid, and I'll be the moderator for this session. We'll start this webcast with a few housekeeping announcements and then quickly move on to our presenters, followed by Q&A if time allows. First and foremost, thank you all very much to our sponsors and ally members for their support for the Energy Efficiency as a Resource Conference and ACEEE. Attendees are in listen-only mode. Please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions of the presenters. As moderator, I'll be sharing your questions with the presenters following the presentation if time allows. Otherwise, we will continue the Q&A in the Zoom chat discussion after the session. Watch for the Zoom link to be posted in the chat during this session or downloaded in the resources section. Please refrain from using the chat for any dialogue other than asking questions. If there is an attendee that would like to connect, if there is an attendee you would like to connect with, please use the attendees link on the left-hand side column of the platform. All registrants are listed alphabetically. Also on the left-hand side, you can find a resources section. Resources contain a copy of the program in a PDF format, an attendee list for downloading, Zoom links for all chats and discussions, and an evaluation form that we ask everyone to complete after they view their last session. Anyone who completes the evaluation and includes their name and a testimonial will receive a $25 discount to attend the 2023 National Conference on Energy Efficiency as a Resource in Philadelphia. All presentations will be available for on-demand viewing within a few days on this engagement hub. Presenters' PowerPoints can be found on their page in the program participant section. Now for the session itself. A growing number of states, utilities, corporations, and local governments are setting high goals for energy efficiency savings. Presentations in this session will show how energy efficiency continues to be a least cost resource, what technologies are likely to play prominent roles in future program portfolios, and how emerging technologies can be incorporated into research and analysis of energy efficiency potential. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers. They are Joe Forcillo with Consumers Energy, Nick Martin with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors, and Chandler Miller with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. We'll start with our first speaker, Joe Forcillo. Joe is the Director of Evaluation, Measurement, and Verification for Consumers Energy, one of the largest combined gas and electric utilities in the U.S. Consumers recently updated its transformational clean energy plan to eliminate coal by 2025. To support the company's vision, Joe and his team have managed hundreds of energy efficiency studies on residential, commercial, and industrial programs and technologies. Prior to joining Consumers, Joe spent most of his career in the management consulting industry, working with Fortune 500 companies and public sector clients. In his presentation today, Joe will discuss the future of energy efficiency with a transformational lens. We'll come to understand the progressive needs of utility-supported energy efficiency and where transformational technologies fit to meet this future. Joe, take it away.
John, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss this important topic with my fellow panelists and those of you attending. Today, I wanted to share a few things that Consumers Energy has learned as we've been trying to look into the somewhat cloudy crystal ball of the future of energy efficiency. And the second part of my title that you should see here that I added post submitting of the abstract was kind of gives you a clue to where I'm going on this, and that is the urgency of a conclusion that I've reached, and I suspect that others have as well, in the importance of collaborating on the map and the journey to get to a future of energy efficiency that we can all be excited about. So I'm going to share some data we've gotten as we've been trying to map out that future, and look forward to the discussion here today. So let me get started. I'm going to be talking about four topics and questions quickly. First, we're starting with what are the future needs for utility-sponsored supported energy efficiency? Where do our forecasts say we're likely to be given existing technologies? What are the predictions? We're going to talk a little bit about some of the insights we've gained from a recent transformational scenario that we did adjacent to our potential study, and then talk a bit about some opportunities for increased collaboration on the map and the journey. So let's blast ahead here. Want to talk a little bit about our company's clean energy plan. And as you look at this slide, you'll see on the bottom axis, the 2020 goes through 2040, and each bar has three colors. If you look at the far left, the blue is energy storage, yellow is renewable energy, and orange is customer efficiency programs. And so as we try to forecast where we need to be from a capacity standpoint, one of the conclusions we've come to is that even with the great expansion of renewables and continued growth, although somewhat slower growth of storage, energy efficiency is going to have to play a key role and a sustained role in achieving the clean energy future that we want from a utility perspective. So then we went and did our, we started with a traditional EE forecast. And one of the things that forecast has predicted is that there's going to be a decline in incremental savings from energy efficiency. Obviously, there will be increased penetration of energy efficiency, but in terms, some measures fall off, reach the end of their useful life. Some become baseline technologies, and so the forecast is for an incremental decline in the effective amount that we're adding to our overall generation through energy efficiency. So that's not an ideal scenario. So what we decided to do is look at what could be the future of energy efficiency, because traditional energy efficiency potential studies do not take into account new technologies. It's pretty much kind of a static view, unless it's all lined up and they know that it's going to be coming online very with existing technology. They typically don't include a lot of new and emerging technologies. So what we did is we investigated savings from emerging technologies that may become commercially available over the next 20 years. And instead of just measuring what technologies are available, again, what's under development and could be available. So how do we create that transformational technology? Well, we consulted experts from a lot of the major players in terms of market transformation organizations, industry research institutes, regional laboratories, and these are a few of the major ones, and including ACEEE as well. We also identified, working with our evaluation team, to look at the most promising technologies based on applicability, development timeline, and a few other components. And then we developed an aggressive scenario that we are now seeking collaboration partners on to help us make happen. With that more aggressive scenario, the results, as you might expect, are far better. So on the far left axis is the amount of incremental megawatt hour savings. And on the right axis, represented by the green bar, is the percentage of sales, past year sales, that this more aggressive transformational technology would contribute to our overall portfolio. So what are some conclusions that we've reached from this? Well, a couple. One is that there's a significant urgency to increase customer focus within multi-industry partnerships. So, for example, it's not enough for technologies to be developed. They're not going to be adopted into the marketplace and get significant market penetration unless they are solving customer problems. And so one of our conclusions is that we have to make sure that the future technologies that are developed focus on solving high priority customer needs and problems, with energy efficiency as just one component, a very important component to us, but still one component of that value proposition. Another conclusion and opportunity for acceleration is expanding effective industry collaboration. And historically, our industry has been very collaborative. There's lots of activity going on, but it's important that we recognize this technology gap that we all have and the importance of collaboration and closing it, and continue to work and share best practices, share the best forums, improve our forums, and identify and solve barriers to better collaboration. Because our forecast right now is that things are moving a little too slowly to fill some of the near-term gaps, and so we need to accelerate that. I'm a director of EM&V, as John mentioned, and I have a EM&V perspective on this, and I think we have a role in the EM&V community to help this and work with our various partners to accelerate EM&V so that we can support new emerging technologies better, get them into the market faster, into TRMs faster. And so one is we've noticed the need to educate manufacturers upfront earlier on the needs of our industry for verification, for the engineering calculations, for their documentation, their research, and then get involved earlier in that process. As well as it's important for the EM&V profession, the industry as a whole, to prioritize making sure that the studies that we do are able to be shared and utilized and are generalizable more nationally as opposed to just in a particular state. So that's going to be important to accelerate progress. And then a fourth item is going to be increasing regulatory collaboration. And so there's a real need for us to engage our regulators in this conversation, in this dialogue, and in the problem solving. How do we work together for them to support the investments that's required to accelerate this technology, and also getting this technology into programs. And so regulators have a key role to play, and we need to work with them closely. We need to share strategies as we figure out effective ways to do so. In terms of some things that we're suggesting that we can kind of contribute to this dialogue, one is this new study that we've done. We looked at 200 emerging technologies. We slimmed that down to 170 technologies that seem most promising. And so that information is within our integrated resource plan that's available online. It's in the references in this presentation. Also, I'm happy to email that to any attendees or panelists that are interested. And what that transformational technology scenario has in it, and that's in the appendices in the back, is it includes measure descriptions, it includes sector and segment applicability, some savings and incremental costs in EUL estimates. And again, these are preliminary. These are, in many cases, kind of best guesses based on the data that exists. Some information we have in terms of the path to commercialization and some of the barriers, as well as some of our references that we came up with in doing the research. And again, this is the link to our overall integrated resource plan, of which the study is just one exhibit. Frankly, if you're really interested in if you're interested in the IRP and the overall plan, that's the right document. If you'd like just the potential study and the scenario, your best bet is to reach out to me. My contact information is here. And I also wanted to give a shout out to one of my colleagues, Miles Beal, who's our ideation and incubation manager, and he is very interested in collaborating with folks that have customer-focused energy efficient technologies. So those things that are emerging that have a strong customer focus, because this is when we talk to customers about energy efficiency is not the first item on their agenda. They have other things they're trying to achieve. We need to have energy efficiency as an important ingredient in those solutions, but that's our view in terms of how we're going to get the fastest scaling of technology adoption, penetration, and energy savings. So that concludes my presentation. I have a couple of additional slides in the deck that provide some additional information about what's in the potential study, the transformational scenario. And so I very much thank you for your time and look forward to learning from the panelists and the audience. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Our next speaker is Chandler Miller. Chandler is a program manager in the electricity markets and policy development at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. His research includes energy efficiency, energy storage, and other distributed energy resources. His focus areas are based in policy, program design and evaluation, as well as the impacts of technologies on utilities and ratepayers. Prior to joining Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, Chandler had several consulting roles where he supported energy storage and other DER projects. Chandler holds a BS in Environmental Engineering Science from University of California, Berkeley, as well as an MS in Nanoengineering from University of California, San Diego. Chandler's presentation will take a look at energy efficiency program costs and impacts through the 2010s. His objective will be to cover an analysis of program administrator cost of saved electricity and program administrator costs of saved peak demand. Chandler, you're up next.
Great. Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate the intro. So my name is Chandler Miller. I am a program manager in the Electricity Markets and Policy Department at Berkeley Lab, and today I'll be sharing the results from our recent analysis on the cost of saving electricity and the cost of saving peak demand. This is a sort of an ongoing project that we've been doing for the last few years, and so this is our most recent sort of iteration of that project. So just to give you an intro, the program administrator cost of saving electricity and cost of saving peak demand measure costs of energy efficiency programs are from the perspective of utilities and other program administrators. And what these are is these are the values that are calculated separately based on the costs incurred by program administrators for individual programs. And they use different units. So the cost of saving electricity is in kilowatt hours, and the cost of saving peak demand is in kilowatts. Energy efficiency can reduce both annual energy consumption and peak demand for electric power systems, and these metrics can be used in resource adequacy planning to ensure electricity system reliability at an affordable cost. They can also be used to benchmark utilities' program results as an initial screen for meeting future demand, and to assess how program cost performance changes over time with funding levels and participation. The program administrator cost of saving electricity and program administrator cost of saving peak demand are calculated using similar methods. So they're the utility or program administrator costs, and they're multiplied by the capital recovery factor and divided by the lifetime electricity or peak demand savings of an energy efficiency program. And so the final values are expressed in dollars per kilowatt hour and dollars per kilowatt. The reason we use the capital recovery factor is we use a discount rate and an estimated program lifetime in order to calculate the present value of program costs so that they can be compared despite having different lifetimes and different start years. And then what you'll see also is some cases here where we calculate the cost of saving electricity or the cost of saving peak demand of a group of programs, and we calculate those using the savings weighted lifetime. So for this project, we collected data from 67 program administrators, which are in 21 different states. And we separated those into 4 different regions for portions of the analysis. So West, South, Midwest, and Northeast. And so in 2018, we compared this data to data from the US Energy Information Administration, and we found that this represented 92% of efficiency spending, 84% of demand reductions, and 90% of efficiency savings. And the data I'll be showing you has 9 years of data for the cost of saving electricity analysis, so 2010 to 2018, and our peak demand analysis has 5 years of data from 2014 to 2018. So given the amount of time for today's presentation, I'm going to be mostly focusing on our cost of saving peak demand results, which are our recent results. But first, I wanted to also give you an overview of our cost of saving electricity findings. So what you see here is we are showing our findings separated by sectors and regions. If you're looking at the total here for sample size, you'll note that the total sample size is larger than those sectors combined because we're not showing cross-cutting, which is another sector that I'll discuss a little bit later. So for most sectors and regions, the cost of saving electricity is similar for the whole study period compared to 2018. So it remained relatively stable over those 9 years. We do see that there is a 10% increase in the program administrator cost of saving electricity for low income, and there's a 25% decrease in the program administrator cost of saving electricity in the West. And this decrease in the West is due to the growth of codes and standards programs in California and Arizona primarily. So what we did is we broke these out into separate years. And so what you can see here is a box plot that shows the distribution of these costs of saving electricity for different programs that were offered in each year. So the top and bottom of the box represent the 75th and 25th percentiles. So half of the data are contained in the box. The bolded horizontal line in the middle is the median, and the red dots are the average cost of saving electricity weighted by the lifetime savings of the programs. The data uses in this analysis is this is a subset of our cost of saving electricity data. So we're only showing the 38 program administrators from 13 states where data was available for all 9 years. So this kind of gives us a consistent way of comparing across all years. What you can see is that the cost of saving electricity was pretty stable over the analysis period with no directionality in the changes. The weighted average ranged from 2.4 to 3.1 cents per kilowatt hour, with the lowest values being in 2017 and 2018. And in every year, the weighted averages are less than the medians, which indicates that the programs with the most lifetime savings tend to be less expensive, and the more expensive programs tend to be smaller programs. So now I'll move on to talking about our cost of saving peak demand. So this table is analogous to the cost of saving electricity table from before, where it compares the levelized cost of saving peak demand for all 5 years of data to its 2018 value. So for nearly every sector and region, you can see that the cost of saving peak demand in 2018 is lower than the levelized cost of saving peak demand for all years. The exception to this is the Northeast, where there's a 10% increase. What you'll see later is that the Northeast has somewhat variable costs year over year. So this 2018 value is actually somewhat similar to the 2016 and 2014 values, but higher than the 2015 and 2017 values. What you can also see is that the Northeast has the highest cost of saving peak demand, and that's because the 2 highest relative states are Massachusetts and Maryland, and the 4th highest state is New York. So it has the states with the largest cost of saving peak demand within that region. What you can also see is that the low income sector has a much higher levelized cost of saving peak demand than other sectors, but this is expected because low-income programs tend to have a higher cost burden than other sectors. We also calculated the percentage of the peak demand savings by sector for each region's portfolio. So residential made up the majority of peak demand savings in the South at 52%. Commercial and industrial made up the majority of peak demand savings in the Midwest and the Northeast. And cross-cutting programs represented 28% of savings in the West, which is significantly more than other regions. Once again, this is from the codes and standards programs that you'll see that are in California. Something we also noticed is that compared to our last collection, low-income programs decreased to only 0.1% in the West, which were 2% before. In the Midwest, cross-cutting programs decreased from 5% to 0.6% after adding 126 additional programs. So what we're showing here is the comparison of that levelized cost of saving peak demand and sample size for all programs compared to a time trend analysis, which only includes 59 program administrators in 19 states with data available from 2014 to 2018. So this is a 5-year period. And we see that the levelized cost of saving peak demand is similar for most years, although it is notably lower for all programs in 2018 for the all programs category, while this is not the case for the time trend analysis. And what we found here is that one of the larger differences is that some Louisiana and Illinois utilities are excluded from our time trend analysis due to a shift in their reporting methods, so they're not included in some years. But otherwise, you can see that the time trend and the all program analysis are pretty comparable. And also, if you look at the sample size, you can see that there's really not a huge difference. I'm sorry. So what we're showing here is the distribution of peak demand and energy savings by cost of saving peak demand, bin, and market sector for all 5 years. And so what we did here is we took individual program years, so that's each program for each year that it was available, and we sorted those program years into levelized cost of saving peak demand bins, which you can see in the x-axis. And we sorted these by sector, so cross-cutting, low income, residential, and commercial and industrial. For each bin, the total portfolio demand savings are plotted on the primary y-axis. So these are the total demand savings achieved from those program years. And the aggregate energy savings for all sectors are plotted on the secondary y-axis. So you can see the axis on the right, we're showing gigawatt hours, while on the left axis, we're showing gigawatts. Something I also wanted to point out here is that you can see that for each of these cost bins is that the bars are showing all programs that cost that much or less. So for example, if you look at the less than 100 bin, this includes all programs that are less than $100 per kilowatt. And so what we see here is that the largest increase in both demand and electricity savings occurs from $100 to $200 per kilowatt compared to other ranges. And so this means that half of all program demand savings are available at a cost of saving peak demand of less than $100 per kilowatt, and 80% of all demand savings are available at a cost of saving peak demand of less than $200 per kilowatt, meaning that that cost bin represents about 30% of demand savings. Also, in comparison, 40% of all electricity savings are available at a cost of saving peak demand of less than $100, and 75% of all electricity savings are available at a cost of saving peak demand of less than $200. And so also what we see here is that the demand savings and the electricity savings have a very similar distribution. What we also developed is an aggregate program savings cost curve that gives a sense of the relative costs and saving contributions for program categories. So the x-axis is what we showed in the y-axis before. So the x-axis shows the share of peak demand savings as a percentage of total first-year portfolio savings in order of ascending cost of saving peak demand. So the y-axis shows the cost of saving peak demand. And the levelized cost of peak demand here was calculated by grouping programs together and calculating a weighted program category lifetime. So where in the last slide we showed individual program years that were sorted together, here we've taken different program categories and we've calculated a single cost of saving peak demand based on those program categories. So what this is showing a few things that you can see from this is that 4 program categories contribute more than 50% of the portfolio demand savings for the period studied. So residential lighting, commercial and industrial custom, commercial and industrial prescriptive, and commercial and industrial all other programs. What you can also see is that the other cross-cutting programs is on the far right. So it has the highest cost of saving peak demand, where codes and standards, which is also included in our cross-cutting category, is the lowest. So the high cost of saving peak demand programs in other cross-cutting are from programs such as marketing, education, outreach, workforce development, planning evaluation, and market transformation in a few different states, while the low codes and standards programs are from utilities in California and Arizona. You can also see that most residential program categories cost more than C&I, besides residential lighting, prescriptive, and new construction, where residential and C&I new construction are pretty similar, actually. What we did is we also compared a similar cost curve for the cost of saving electricity, and we found that really one of the only differences is that residential behavior and education makes up 8.9% of demand savings, but only 0.8% of energy savings. So it has a much higher contribution to demand savings than it does to electricity savings. So wrapping that up, we found 4 key findings from this analysis, particularly the cost of saving peak demand analysis. So looking at the left charts, the program administrator cost of saving peak demand declined over time during the study period for most sectors and regions. So besides the Northeast, you can see a pretty consistent decline for all sectors and regions. If you look at the top right chart, we see that half of all individual program demand savings are available at a cost of saving peak demand of less than $100 per kilowatt. Furthermore, the share of savings and cost bins and cost curves for program categories for energy and peak demand show a high similarity between relative cost and savings contribution for most types of efficiency program types. And then finally, as shown in the bottom right chart, programs contribute more than 50% of the portfolio demand savings for the period studied. So C&I custom, C&I prescriptive, residential lighting, and residential behavior and education. So the last thing, because I didn't have a lot of time to go over a lot of our other results, and we have a lot more things that you can see, is I wanted to just sort of give a shout out to these additional resources that we have available. So we have our project page, which is the What It Costs to Save Energy page on our site. And this has access to all webinars, publications, visualizations, and other tools, and also contact information. And what we also have here, which is just recently available, is our interactive visualization tool, which you can see a screenshot. And this gives you an opportunity to sort of explore all of the different data and the different results that we have for yourself. And you can click through and you can click on these different states so you can kind of get a better idea of what these results look like. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Chandler. Before we get into the next presentation, I do just want to remind the attendees that on the right-hand side, there is the chat box there. So we do welcome your questions for our presenters, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation and then in the following Zoom call. Now we will hear from Nick Martin. Nick is a consultant at Dunsky with 7 years of experience in climate and energy policy, strategy, and economics. Nick assists clients by distilling large amounts of data and analysis into actionable insights and recommendations. With Dunsky, Nick has contributed to projects in both the US and Canada with a focus on assessing the comprehensive market opportunity for clean energy technologies and designing policies to support these technologies. Prior to joining Dunsky, Nick had experience working with Pace Energy and the Climate Center in New York. He also served as executive director of the Northeast Clean Heat and Power Initiative. Nick's discussion will explore the current position lighting has in energy efficiency programs and where these programs might come to secure these savings given the transition away from lighting. Nick, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for the intro there. And also thank you to ACEEE for having me here today. So As John mentioned, I'll be talking about efficiency programs in a post-lighting world. And just quickly, as mentioned, my name is Nick. I am a consultant with Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. And just a little bit about our company. For those of you who don't know, we are a small firm that's been around for about 20 years, based out of Montreal, Canada, with staff all across the country up here to the north. I'm currently located in Toronto, and we specialize in helping our clients accelerate that clean energy transition. So, our areas of expertise are in three main areas: buildings, including efficiency, beneficial electrification, and demand response; renewables, as well as mobility, particularly around the electrification of transportation. And then our services are really concentrated in three areas too: quantifying opportunities, designing strategies, including programs and policy, and evaluating performance, pretty much everything except for implementation. And so for this presentation, I'm going to lean on some of our recent opportunity assessment and strategy design work to talk about the changing nature of electric efficiency programs, using the results and findings of a handful of recent potential studies that we've conducted in the Northeast United States. Specifically, I want to look at how the success of lighting efficiency programs, coupled with rapidly transforming lighting markets, are impacting the remaining potential for electric efficiency savings, and what this means for policy and programs moving forward. So beginning with the success of lighting programs and transforming markets, I'll start by highlighting the studies and jurisdictions I'll be referencing in this presentation. So there's 4 studies, and they all are concentrated in the Northeast United States. They've all been completed within the last couple of years, and they're all relatively short-term studies looking out between 3 to 6 years in the future. So just as a bit of a contrast from the study Joe was mentioning earlier, we were looking much shorter term, really at technologies that are commercially available today. Less guesswork when you're looking closer out. All of these studies are publicly available, and they are hyperlinked in the slide deck here, which you should have access to. And I'll just note that while I'll be concentrating on electric savings, these studies do feature assessments for other distributed energy resources such as gas efficiency, electric demand response, combined heat and power, heating electrification, and distributed solar PV. So all of that can be viewed in those public reports. So just quickly going in order for when these studies were completed, the first was a statewide study for Rhode Island. The second was another statewide study for New Hampshire. And then the final 2 were for Eversource and Cape Light Compact, or CLC, 2 electric utilities operating in the state of Massachusetts. And so for, let's mention that all these states have been running, top tier and highly rated efficiency programs, with each state ranking in at least the top 20 in terms of ACEEE state energy efficiency scorecard ranking, with, of course, Massachusetts and Rhode Island being near the tippy top there, ranking within the top 5. And so the first thing I want to highlight is that in all of these jurisdictions, they've historically had a very strong focus on lighting savings. And I think this is likely the case of pretty much any efficiency program you may find out there, but it does bear highlighting here. And as you can see in the graph, which shows the split between lighting and non-lighting electric savings for recent program performance and plans in each of these jurisdictions, you can see that savings have been weighted towards lighting measures, with more than 60% of each jurisdiction's electric savings coming from lighting measures in recent years. And just, a comment this is not a crazy thing, and it generally makes sense because LEDs and efficient lighting are very efficient, and they have high savings compared to those inefficient baseline lighting. And over time, their costs have come down significantly, which really, what makes benefits heavily outweigh their costs. And finally, for the most part, these types of measures are fairly easy to adopt for consumers. For most of these measures, it's just a matter of screwing in an LED instead of an inefficient bulb. So, in general, this makes it pretty easy to convince consumers to adopt an efficient technology with a little nudge, such as a rebate or an incentive. And so thanks in part to the success of these programs and getting folks to adopt efficient lighting, we are beginning to see rapid shifts in lighting markets in these jurisdictions. Consumers are increasingly choosing efficient lighting products, even in the absence of program interventions and incentives. This is well illustrated, I think, by net to gross assumptions that capture free ridership effects used in program plans and in our studies, as displayed in the figure here. And the key thing to really note from this figure is that these factors are sloping downward, and they are getting very low. In some cases, they're hitting zero, meaning the assumption is the market is completely transformed. All customers would choose that efficient product even without program intervention, making it very difficult for programs to claim those savings as incremental to naturally occurring adoption. Just the other thing to note here as well is that based on these factors, at least New Hampshire's market transformation is a few years behind Massachusetts, as well as Rhode Island, which isn't displayed in this graph, but generally has kind of similar market transformation assumptions as Massachusetts. So with these programs' historical focus on lighting savings and transforming markets, let's talk about how this is impacting the remaining potential for savings as illustrated by our recent potential studies. So with more and more people adopting efficient lighting, whether through programs or on their own, more and more of the existing lighting stock that is out there is becoming efficient, as one might expect. But this further reduces opportunities for program-driven lighting savings. This is particularly evident in our assessments of technical electric potential in our studies. And so we actually performed the previous potential studies for Eversource and CLC 3 years ago. So we can look at how this metric has changed between each iteration of these studies. And as shown in the figure here, we did see very significant drops in technical potential for electric savings, almost entirely driven by changes in opportunities for lighting measures. So these drops were pretty significant in the range of 34 to 44%, illustrating that huge loss of opportunities for lighting savings. And so when you combine the fact that there are less lighting opportunities and as well as much higher free ridership rates in programs, efficiency programs will lose a large chunk of their claimable savings if they continue their programs as currently structured. So in every one of these studies, we found that maintaining programs at current incentive levels while applying assumptions regarding lighting market transformation will result in overall declines in electric portfolio savings relative to past program performance. That's exactly what's shown here, which is a waterfall graph of the difference between Eversource's programs in 2019 against our modeled savings in 2022 under current incentive levels. And so, overall, it is a pretty big decline, about 70%, driven almost entirely by the loss of lighting savings from both the residential and commercial sectors. This reduction in lighting savings will also shift the bulk of program savings from lighting measures to non-lighting measures as well. And so the figure here is just showing two examples of that from New Hampshire and our Rhode Island studies, where you can see that lighting savings are reduced to less than half of the overall portfolio. Still sizable chunks, but in each instance a bit different than what we've seen in the past. And so while our studies suggest that savings will decline relative to past performance under current incentive levels, our studies also show that it's possible to increase savings relative to this business as usual scenario by increasing incentives or giving customers more money. So in each of our studies, we model various scenarios that look at customer adoption under different incentive levels, including ones where the incremental costs of these measures are completely eliminated for customers, giving them a 100% incentive in a scenario we generally refer to as maximum achievable. And so by doing this, we can identify measures where customer economics appear to be a major barrier to adoption still. And in the example here that I'm showing, this is from the Eversource study, we saw that HVAC-related measures in particular, such as heat pumps, efficient heat pumps, air conditioners, are very responsive to increased incentives, suggesting there's a financial barrier there. Lighting savings as well can be increased relative to these BAU scenarios, particularly through advanced lighting controls, but the incremental increase there is not as great as other end uses such as HVAC. However, even through increasing incentives increasing incentives will increase saving levels relative to business as usual, even this will not be enough to get back to past program performance levels once markets are significantly transformed as they are in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and increasingly in New Hampshire. As can be seen in the graph here, where we're comparing each jurisdiction's 2019 program performance to our study's maximum achievable potential estimates, it's only in New Hampshire where savings are able to surpass past performance, in part due to the fact that those net to gross ratios for lighting are assumed to be a bit higher there, as I previously mentioned. Everywhere else, however, we are not able to reach past performance levels by increasing incentives even up to 100% for customers. But this is not to say that additional savings do not exist. Our studies also show that even when 100% incentives are given, there are still a lot of cost-effective savings that remain uncaptured. So the graph here is showing where we're comparing the difference between each study's modeled economic savings against savings captured under that maximum achievable scenario. And as can be seen, in each instance, a big chunk of cost-effective savings between 30 to nearly 50% remain uncaptured. And so this gap is attributable to barriers that are really beyond just those financial costs of these measures, including things such as low market or consumer awareness in general, insufficient contractor knowledge or awareness, and just general complexities in implementing these measures. In many cases, consumers will forego bill savings just to avoid the headaches of tearing up their house and that type of thing to get those savings. So transforming lighting markets will make efficiency savings much harder to procure in the future at a time when more pressure is being placed on finding even more savings as policymakers continue to press forward on climate action. So what does this mean for efficiency policy moving forward? I have a few thoughts to share. And I think what it really shows is that it suggests that a much greater focus on long-term changes is going to be needed. So these potential results suggest that traditional resource procurement approach, providing incentives for measures, will not necessarily be enough to maintain past program performance, even with significant incentives. They'll still be important, but we do know that a lot of untapped potential still does exist, which means that if we're going to maintain or increase electric savings, we'll need to try different approaches. Many of these approaches are not new for program administrators, but they will need a renewed focus, including long-term market support activities like contractor training, consumer marketing and education efforts, and partnerships with other entities, some of the things that Joe was talking about in his presentation. But these are all kind of things that don't necessarily pay off in the very near short term, but they can really lay the groundwork for dividends in the long term. Another avenue is through regulations, including building codes and appliance standards, both in terms of working to make them stronger, as well as helping customers adhere to these. And this is an area where we are seeing program administrators take a bigger role, particularly where they can claim credit for some of these savings as well. But the problem really is that many of our current frameworks for energy efficiency are not well suited for making the long-term changes that are going to be needed. So as I mentioned, we're now starting to see a greater emphasis on other policy priorities, particularly around the need to drive greenhouse gas emission reductions over the long term. So thinking decades, not just couple-year plans. But efficiency targets have traditionally been aimed at procuring these short-term annual energy savings. And along with these targets, the cost-effectiveness frameworks that are used to assess these programs have also been aimed mostly around reducing the cost of energy supply and not necessarily reducing emissions or achieving other policy priorities. So this means that new frameworks will be needed, something that we've been helping a number of our clients navigate as of late. And so just to say a few words about what these frameworks will need from our perspective, first, these frameworks will need to align with policy goals. This is both in terms of needing long-term targets that align with the need to focus on more market transformation activities that do take longer to come to fruition, as well as climate goals and emission reductions to ensure that we're going after the things that will help us achieve these goals most efficiently. These frameworks will also need to provide flexibility for procuring new resources that might not necessarily fit that traditional efficiency mold. I think a great example of this that we're seeing now is around beneficial electrification, where the measure may actually increase electricity consumption, though decrease other fuels and help drive emission reductions. And the final note is that these frameworks will also need to think about demand, not just energy, particularly in a world where the marginal cost of electricity is declining with the addition of more renewables. The need to reduce the cost of capacity will become more and more important, which we're starting to see with greater emphasis on things like non-wires alternatives. So just to sum it up, the short conclusion, as we're seeing, lighting savings are going away as lighting markets are nearing full transformation, driven in part by successful efficiency programs. The traditional resource procurement approaches, can still drive a lot of savings, but are unlikely to be enough for maintaining or increasing electric savings as compared to past performance levels. And so different frameworks will be needed that align with our policy goals and provide the flexibility to achieve these policy goals. And thank you. I'm looking forward to the ensuing discussion.
Thank you very much, Nick. We'll now address a few questions from the audience. And if you have not already done so, please submit your question using the chat on the right. We do have a question to start for Chandler. Chandler, if we see a cost of $200 per kilowatt for peak demand savings, does that mean that the full utility cost of the energy efficiency measure or program is compared to the kilowatt savings, or is it the value of energy saved somehow taken out of the cost calculation?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks Natalie in the chat, who's my colleague, who I think answered some of these questions. But so the distinction to make here is that what we use is we calculate the cost of saving electricity and the cost of saving peak demand separately. So for every program, we collect their claimed energy savings in kilowatt hours, and then they also have claimed demand savings, which are in kilowatts. And so we collect those separately, and we use the full program administrator cost of that program. So we use the full cost, and we use that for both calculating the cost of saving electricity and the cost of saving peak demand. So you have to consider them separately. You can't add them together. They're not like distributed in any particular way. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Chandler. While you have the floor, we did have a question too. If you could remind us what the percentage of electric savings for residential education was.
Yeah, so we have a residential behavior category, which includes education, and that was, I think, 0.8% of total savings, which is quite different from the peak demand savings, which was, I think, 8.9%. And so that's for things like online audits, energy reports, things like that. There is also a cross-cutting category that has marketing and outreach, which is sort of a form of education, and that's not included in that bucket, but that is also a relatively small category as well.
Thank you. This question is for Nick. Nick, do you use the base diffusion to model market potential for max achievable? How do you set the external and internal coefficients?
Yeah, so we, for some of our modeling, we do use that approach. And then for others, and for most of our efficiency measures, we actually use some modified versions of DOE developed barrier and adoption curves for efficiency measures. So that's all documented in our methodology appendices of those reports. But our general approach, though, is to one, we rely on a lot of market actor research and other studies to help set barrier levels for efficiency measures that then correspond to those DOE-derived adoption curves. And then we take those and we tune them to the local jurisdiction that we're working in by calibrating our results under those BAU incentive levels to what we're seeing in past program performance. And it's through that process then that we can then adjust incentives up based on those barrier levels to see what is our estimate of that maximum market potential beyond doing other types of transformational activities.
Thank you. We'll go to Joe next. Joe, we've got a question here. Seems like consumers is focusing on new industrial and commercial approaches. Not surprising for your service territory. Any leading candidates stand out? What about residential measures?
Great question. The potential study does show, as do many other potential studies, that greater potential remains on the C&I side, or at least as a percentage of the total contribution to portfolio savings. So we are looking at quite a few different technologies, as well as additional penetration of existing technologies. Our program team is better able to speak to exactly what we're looking at, but there's no single silver bullet. I know that from my conversations with the C&I team. They're looking at a wide range, and the emerging tech, it's the same issue, is that we're looking at a very wide range of emerging tech. On the residential side, that question, obviously, in a very important segment. We are looking at additional opportunities on residential because the residential market is a little bit less, quite a bit less diverse than the C&I market. There's there's less diversity in the technologies that are available, but we're still beating the bushes looking for things and seeing where we can get scale. So looking at a wide range of things, but no, I can speak to some of the we're looking at some technology solutions, some different ways of communicating to customers using apps and online services. So that's a piece of it, the kind of behavioral piece, but also looking at other kind of more widget measures.
Super. Thank you, Joe. Got another minute or so. We'll do one more question here, and then we'll look to close up the session. This one's for Nick. Nick, does Dunsky have any proposals for motivating utilities to transition their portfolio goals beyond reducing cost of energy supply? Utilities are incentivized under current frameworks to ensure cost effectiveness for ratepayers rather than meeting policy-based goals. What strategies can be deployed to bridge the gap? And that's a pretty big question. I'm interested to hear into that. And if we don't have enough time to fully delve into that, we've got the Zoom chat next.
Yeah, I can definitely talk more about on Zoom, but very, very quickly, there's something I can't publicly talk about at the moment. We are looking at a variety of kind of new types of approaches, but at a very high level, just say for utilities, they're regulated entities. And so they're really beholden to both their regulators as well as their shareholders, right? But so it's going to come down to looking to policies set by regulators and setting them in a way that would motivate the utility to actually change these things. So we're talking about changing these, or looking at new ways to change these frameworks to actually change those motivations and allow these utilities to operate under frameworks that would align with those goals. But happy to talk about it more on the Zoom side.
Super. Thank you very much, Nick. I want to thank everyone, to all of our speakers for their presentations, to attendees for participating in today's webcast and providing some great questions here. Again, if you would like to continue exploring the topics that we presented about today, well, I didn't present, that our presenters presented about, please follow us to the Zoom chat room. There is a link in the chat, and we'll see you there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, presenters.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.